The Starhawk stood on the launch pad, its sleek, polished hull glinting under the harsh lights of the hangar. A revolutionary ship designed to break the limitations of space travel with a warp drive unlike any before. This was the moment the crew had waited for, the test that would determine the future of space exploration. But for Captain Nadia Reyne, the excitement felt hollow, overshadowed by a deep, gnawing concern. Nadia stood in the command center, her hands clasped behind her back, staring out at the shimmering warp core. She'd seen the tests, read the data, and understood the theory behind it all. But nothing could replace the unease settling in her gut. This wasn't just about speed. This was about pushing the very fabric of reality. "Captain," said Lieutenant Oren, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying the hint of nervousness. "We're ready for the first jump." Nadia nodded slowly, her mind still racing. The Starhawk had been designed to travel faster than light using a warp core that could bend spacetime itself, but it had never been tested on such a scale. What if they were pushing too far, too fast? She turned to her crew, gathered in the control room. They were eager, excited, their faces lit with the thrill of the unknown. They had trained for this moment their entire lives, but Nadia couldn't ignore the dark whisper at the back of her mind. The unknown could be as dangerous as it was thrilling. "Everything we do today will change the course of human history," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But be ready for anything. The theory might be sound, but there's always a chance that theory will break apart under the weight of reality." Oren gave her a sharp nod. "Understood, Captain." Initiating the countdown. Nadia took one last look at the sleek metal beast they had built. The Starhawk wasn't just a ship, it was humanity's hope. If this worked, they'd have access to the stars in ways they couldn't even begin to imagine. But if it failed, she pushed the thought aside. There was no turning back now. "Ready," Oren's voice crackled through the speaker. 3, 2, 1, engage. The ship hummed to life as the warp core powered up. The room seemed to tremble with the energy building within the vessel, and for a moment, it felt like the air itself was vibrating. Nadia's hand rested lightly on the armrest of her chair, but she could feel the tension in her bones. This was it. The Starhawk lurched forward, then shot into the warp field with a violent burst of energy. Nadia's stomach lurched with it, as if gravity itself had been torn away for a moment. She gripped the armrest tighter, staring at the view screen, waiting for the familiar stretch of spacetime that would signify they were traveling faster than light. But something was wrong. The stars on the screen didn't elongate into streaks of light. They didn't stretch like they should have. Instead, they shimmered, flickered, and then the whole ship lurched again. This time, it was as though the universe itself had torn open. The control room went dark, the emergency lights flashing red, and the hum of the warp drive became a low, sinister buzz. "Status report," Nadia barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We've lost power to half the systems, Captain," Oren replied, his voice tight. "The warp core is fluctuating, and we've detected multiple rifts in the fabric of space-time." Nadia's heart skipped a beat. Rifts, space-time anomalies. This was exactly what she feared. The ship had fractured reality itself. "Helm, adjust course. Get us out of here." The ship didn't respond. Instead, the view screen flickered again, and someone, appeared. A moment of déjà vu that felt too real to be a mere glitch. The scene was familiar, almost identical to the one they had just passed through minutes ago. The Starhawk was flying through space, heading towards a distant star. But as the crew looked at the view screen, they realized something was horribly wrong. That's impossible," Lieutenant Oren whispered. "We've already seen this." Nadia leaned forward, her heart racing. "Explain, Lieutenant." "We were just," Oren paused, a sick look crossing his face. "We were just heading towards that star. But now, it's like we're seeing it again. Only we remember it differently." The room fell silent, the crew exchanging uneasy glances. The air felt thick, like the gravity in the room had shifted. Everything seemed off. Nadia turned sharply to the navigational officer. "Status, where are we?" The officer hesitated, eyes darting nervously to her console. "We're still in the same space, Captain. But something's wrong. The coordinates don't match. We've jumped to a different timeline." "Timeline?" Nadia repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean by different timeline?" "It's like we're caught in a moment that's already happened. Only we've changed it. Or maybe it's changed us." The gravity of the situation hit her like a wave. They had never intended to breach the boundaries of time, only to break the speed of light. But now, they had shattered something far more dangerous. Space-time itself was warping, and they were caught in it. Suddenly, the lights flickered once more, and the rift in the fabric of reality appeared on the screen. For a moment, it was a swirling vortex, a dark hole in the stars. And within it, they saw flashes, distorted images, brief fragments of events that hadn't happened yet, people they didn't recognize, places that shouldn't exist. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the rift vanished. The crew was left in stunned silence. The Starhawk was adrift, suspended between moments, lost in time itself. "Captain," Oren said quietly, his voice barely audible. "What do we do now?" Nadia stared at the empty space outside the view screen, her mind racing. This wasn't just a malfunction. They had opened a door they couldn't close, and the rifts in reality weren't just affecting the ship. They were affecting the very fabric of existence. "We keep moving forward," she said, her voice steady. But deep down, she was gripped by a terrifying uncertainty. "But be prepared for anything. We may have just fractured everything." And as the ship drifted through the rift, Nadia couldn't help but wonder if they were already too far gone. The line between reality and the unknown had blurred, and there was no telling where, or when, they might end up next. The Starhawk had jumped faster than light, but now it seemed like it was moving through time itself. The question was, how far would they go before reality broke completely? The rifts were only just beginning, and they had no idea what lay ahead. The crew finds themselves trapped in an endless loop, questioning reality itself. Are they stuck in a moment from the past, or something far worse? The Starhawk drifted silently through the blackness of space, its engines humming with a soft, almost comforting rhythm. But for Captain Nadia Reyne, the quiet had become suffocating. It had been hours, days, since they had jumped into the unknown. And now something felt wrong. The crew was on edge, their eyes darting nervously from one another, sensing the unease but unable to pinpoint the cause. "Captain," Oren's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and urgent. "We've been over this already. We're stuck in a loop." Nadia felt the weight of his words settle on her chest. She didn't need him to say it aloud. She could feel it too. The same events, the same conversations, the same actions. It was as if time itself had folded in on them, forcing them to relive the same moments again and again. Each time, just a little different, but always the same core events. She looked over at her navigation officer, who had been staring at his console for hours without blinking. His fingers danced over the controls, trying to find a way out. But the more he worked, the more it seemed like they were sinking deeper into the loop. "We've been here before," he muttered, almost to himself. "How is this even possible?" Nadia gritted her teeth and turned toward him. "What do you mean, we've been here before?" He didn't look up from the console. "Captain, we're stuck in a loop. Same coordinates, same time. Every time we try to break free, we end up back where we started." Her eyes narrowed. "Is there any way to fix it?" He paused, fingers hovering over the controls. "I'm trying to reroute the warp core, but..." The ship shook violently, throwing the crew off balance. Nadia grabbed the armrests of her chair, her heart racing as alarms blared across the ship. The rifts were growing stronger, more unstable. "Brace for impact," Oren shouted. The ship lurched again, this time with an unsettling force. Lights flickered and the crew was thrown into darkness for a moment. When the lights came back on, everything felt the same. The same moment, the same scene. Yet something had changed. Nadia could feel it. "Captain," Oren said quietly, I think we just relived this moment." Nadia's chest tightened. She looked around at her crew. They were all here, in the same positions they had been before. The same anxious expressions, the same nervous glances, but there was something different in their eyes now. A flicker of recognition, a moment of understanding that hadn't been there before. "Did any of you notice that?" Nadia asked, her voice steady but unsure. "Did we just go through this already?" A few of her crew members nodded, their expressions blank, as if they weren't sure whether to speak up or not, but not all of them reacted the same way. Some, like Oren, were keenly aware of the anomaly, while others seemed to be going about their tasks as though nothing had happened. "Captain," Lieutenant Lyra's voice was shaky as she glanced at the view screen. "We're seeing the same star field again, the same rift." Nadia's eyes flicked to the screen. It was true. The same swirling vortex of black and purple stretched across the stars. They hadn't moved. They were stuck. "This is bad," she muttered under her breath. "This is more than just a malfunction. We're caught in a loop." The ship trembled once more, but this time, Nadia didn't brace for impact. She knew what was coming. She had seen it before. The sudden jolting motion, the flickering lights, the familiar voices calling out. "Captain," Oren said, his voice barely audible. "There's something wrong. Every time this loop resets, I feel like I'm losing something. My memories. They're fading. I keep forgetting." Nadia felt a cold chill run down her spine. "What do you mean, forgetting?" He looked at her, his eyes distant. "Little things. Conversations. Faces. I can't remember what happened before the loop started, but I know there was something important. Something we're missing." She nodded slowly. "We're losing ourselves in this loop. Our memories are unraveling." The thought made her blood run cold. How long had they been in this cycle? Days? Weeks? It felt like time had stopped, but she couldn't be sure. Every time the loop reset, it was as though the ship's systems had wiped away the past, leaving them with only fragments of what they had just experienced. "Captain," Lyra said, her voice trembling now. "Something's wrong with you, too." Nadia frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" I saw you, Captain," Lyra whispered, her face pale. "In the hallway. Just now. But you weren't yourself. You looked like you were. From the future. You looked different." Nadia's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" Lyra shook her head, eyes wide with fear. "It wasn't just me. Others saw it too." Nadia's mind raced. This wasn't just a loop. There was something else at play here. Something far more sinister. The rifts had already begun to distort time, and now they were distorting reality itself. She had seen it before, but now the loop was changing them, taking their memories, making them forget who they were. But there was something worse, something that sent a chill straight to her heart. The rift opened again, the same as before. But this time, something was different. She felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. Slowly, she turned to look, and there, standing at the edge of the command center, was herself. But not the Nadia Reyne she knew. This one was older, worn, and the look in her eyes was one of hopelessness, of defeat. She locked eyes with the future version of herself, and the words that came from her mouth sent a jolt of terror through her. "You can't fix this," the future Nadia whispered. The voice was hollow, as though it came from the depths of some inescapable void. Nadia froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Was this the future she was destined to face? A future where the loop was endless and time itself had fractured beyond repair. Nadia opened her mouth to speak, but the vision of her future self vanished as quickly as it had appeared. She turned to her crew, her voice tight with the weight of uncertainty. "We need to get out of here. We can't stay stuck in this loop. We have to find a way to break free." But deep down, Nadia knew. They were caught in something much bigger than they had realized. And every time the loop reset, the rift grew stronger. The memories faded, the future became uncertain, and the past slipped further away. The question now wasn't if they could escape the loop. It was whether they could ever return to the reality they once knew. The rift grows larger, and with every reset, the crew loses more of their memories. Nadia begins to question if escaping is even possible anymore. Time is slipping away, and soon, it might be too late to remember what they've lost. The rift pulse rippled through the ship again, a harsh, unnatural vibration that shook the walls. Captain Nadia Reyne gripped the edge of the command chair, feeling the tremors of the Starhawk's disintegrating reality. The walls seemed to warp, bending like the flicker of a faulty light. "Report," Reyne barked, her voice sharp with urgency. She glanced around at the crew, their faces pale, their expressions dazed. Each of them had felt it. The rift, the strange pull that tugged at their very being. First Officer Lieutenant Jace Silva stood at the navigation console, his brow furrowed as he worked furiously to stabilize the ship. "Captain, the rifts are getting worse. They're pulling us into alternate realities, different versions of ourselves. Some of these versions are not us." Reyne's heart raced. She had known things were deteriorating, but the idea of alternate versions of herself and her crew was something she couldn't even begin to process. She moved toward Silva, trying to steady herself. "What exactly do you mean by alternate realities?" Jace's hands flew across the controls, his focus unwavering. "It's like we're slipping between worlds. Each time the rift opens, we're pulled into a reality where things are different. Some versions of us are allies, others are enemies. Some worlds, they don't even have us. It's like we don't exist there." Reyne shook her head, her mind struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. The warp drive was supposed to be humanity's salvation. Not this. How is this possible? What went wrong? He didn't look at her as he spoke, his voice tinged with frustration. "I don't know, Captain. But I think it has something to do with the warp core. It's not just a power source. It's interacting with the ship's consciousness. The drive, it's not just warping space, it's warping reality itself." Reyne's stomach churned at the implications. The warp drive had always been experimental, but this was something beyond comprehension. "We need to fix it. Now." Jace nodded but looked over at her, his eyes filled with an unspoken dread. "I'm not sure there's anything we can do. It's like the ship's mind is breaking. The core, it's alive, somehow." She didn't want to hear that. Alive, the ship was supposed to be their tool, not some sentient entity. But the rifts were evidence enough that something had gone terribly wrong. As the ship trembled again, Reyne turned away from Jace, pacing around the command deck. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. The last few days had been a blur of fear, confusion, and desperation. But now, with the rifts growing stronger and more unpredictable, she knew time was running out. Her mind wandered to her father. He had been a scientist, a genius in the field of physics. But more than that, he had always warned her about the dangers of pushing boundaries. "You can't rush something like this," he had said. "If you don't understand what you're tampering with, you might end up creating something far worse than you can imagine." The memory hit her like a punch to the gut. She remembered standing in his lab, watching as he worked tirelessly on his own warp drive prototype. He had warned her then, too, about the unknowns, about the dangers of breaking the laws of physics without knowing what they were dealing with. At the time, she had dismissed his concerns, believing in the promise of the technology. Now, standing on the brink of disaster, she wished she had listened. "Captain." Jace's voice broke through her thoughts, his face tight with concern. "It's happening again. Another rift is opening." Reyne snapped her attention back to the console. A massive rift was appearing on the view screen, its swirling vortex pulling the ship toward it. She could feel the ship shuddering under the strain, the walls groaning as they were stretched in ways they were never meant to be. "Brace yourselves," she commanded, gripping the armrests of her chair as the ship lurched forward. Her heart raced in her chest, the ship accelerating into the unknown. The rift opened wider, pulling at them with an unnatural force. The lights on the ship flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Crew members shouted in confusion as the pull grew stronger. The ship was being torn apart by the force of it, the very fabric of reality unraveling around them. But it wasn't just the ship that was changing. She could see it now, feel it. Her crew, too, was changing. The faces in front of her flickered, sometimes familiar, sometimes distorted. Lieutenant Silva had been standing at the navigation console just moments ago, but now he was gone. His station was empty, and in his place, a stranger stood, a man who wore Silva's uniform, but whose face was unfamiliar. "Silva," Reyne called out, stepping forward. The man turned slowly, his eyes locking with hers. But they weren't Silva's eyes. They were cold, distant. "Who are you?" Reyne demanded, her voice trembling. "Where is Jace Silva?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he slowly raised a hand, and the rift pulsed again, stronger this time. The walls around them flickered, as if they were flickering in and out of different realities. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the stranger vanished, leaving nothing behind but the strange, empty feeling in Reyne's gut. She turned to the rest of the crew, her mind spinning. "What just happened?" she whispered. "Where did Silva go?" One of the crew members, Lieutenant Farron, stepped forward, her eyes wide with fear. "Captain, I saw it too. He was here, then he was gone. But he wasn't the same. He wasn't Jace. That wasn't him." Reyne's stomach twisted. This was bad. This was worse than bad. Silva had disappeared. But worse, he had been replaced by a stranger from another reality, another version of him, perhaps, or something entirely different. The rift was warping more than just their ship. It was warping them too. She reached for her communicator, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to focus. Find Silva. Find out what's going on with these rifts. We have to get him back, and we have to do it fast." But as she spoke, she realized the truth. There was no guarantee they would ever be able to return to their reality. No guarantee that the crew, their ship, or even she herself would survive whatever this was. The rift grew wider, the ship groaning in protest as reality continued to tear itself apart. Reyne's mind raced, trying to find an answer, but it was clear that there was no simple fix. The warp core was not just a malfunction. It was a force beyond their understanding. And as another version of Jace Silva, or someone who looked like him, appeared on the bridge, Reyne knew that no one on the Starhawk was safe from the destruction that had already begun. The ship hummed with an eerie, unnatural sound, a low vibration that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality itself. Captain Nadia Reyne stood at the bridge, staring at the view screen, but it was no longer just a view of the stars. What she saw before her was a fractured, shattered space, a tangled mess of timelines and dimensions. The stars were no longer fixed points in the black void. Instead, they flickered and shifted, appearing and disappearing, as if they were alive, breathing in sync with the ship. "Captain, you need to see this." Lieutenant Silva's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to face him, but something was wrong. His eyes seemed unfocused, his expression distant. He wasn't looking at her, but through her, as if lost in another reality altogether. "What is it, Silva?" she asked, her voice strained. He shook his head, his hands trembling slightly as he pointed to the console. "The ship's navigation is completely off. The timelines, they're shifting. Parts of the ship are in different realities." Reyne's stomach twisted. She had felt it too. The rifts were becoming more unpredictable, more dangerous. And now, it seemed, they weren't just distorting space. They were distorting time itself. The fabric of the Starhawk was being torn apart, not just physically, but mentally. The crew was feeling it too. "We're sailing through a fragmented space," Reyne muttered to herself, trying to make sense of it. "Timelines are shifting, and we're caught in the middle of it." Lieutenant Silva nodded, his face pale. "Yes, Captain. Some parts of the ship exist in one timeline, and others in another. We're not just traveling through space anymore. We're traveling through time. And it's breaking us." Reyne glanced around the bridge, noting the confused expressions on the crew's faces. People were looking at each other as if they didn't recognize one another. Some crew members were muttering to themselves, others staring blankly at their consoles. The confusion was spreading like wildfire. Memories were colliding, and they were all starting to feel the strain. "Captain," came the voice of Ensign Farron from across the room. I saw my mother, but she was younger. It was like a memory, but also like it was happening again, right in front of me." Reyne turned to her, concern etched across her face. "You're experiencing déjà vu. You're not alone. The timelines, they're collapsing into each other. The ship's mind is starting to crack along with the fabric of space. People are slipping between past, present, and future." A shudder ran through the ship, a warning that the damage was only worsening. Reyne steadied herself on the console, her breath quickening as she felt her own mind begin to slip. She had seen it too, flashes of her own past, her own future, all mixing together in a jumbled mess of images and emotions. Her sister's face flashed before her eyes, the one person she'd lost in a mission gone wrong. But something was wrong. The image of her sister, that image of her death, it wasn't clear anymore. It was fuzzy, distorted, like a memory from another life. Reyne stumbled backward, grasping at the walls for support. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "It can't be. She died in an accident." "I know that." But the more she thought about it, the more the memories shifted. Was it an accident? Or was it something else? Her sister had died on a mission years ago, a mission she had been a part of, but now with the timelines collapsing, her death felt like it could have been something else entirely. A twist of fate, or perhaps something darker, something deliberately caused. Her sister's death, the event that had driven her to the captain's seat, was now unraveling in her mind. "Captain," Silva said again, his voice urgent. Reyne turned to see him standing by the console, his face pale and filled with confusion. "I'm seeing things, Captain. I saw you. I saw us together. We were in another reality, and you were holding a gun." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. A gun. She had never held a gun in her life, except for training, but the image, the sensation of it, was so vivid in his mind. And now in hers. Could that have been real? Could they have been in another reality, another life where things had gone differently? The rift pulse grew stronger, and Reyne's head spun as her mind was pulled between memories, alternate versions of herself and her crew. The moment she had forgotten was now becoming clearer. Her father, the man who had warned her about tampering with reality, had always talked about the consequences of trying to manipulate time. He had told her that it wasn't just about changing the past or future. It was about changing who you were in the process. The warp drive wasn't just breaking space. It was breaking them too. It wasn't just about jumping through time. It was about losing themselves to it. They were becoming something else, something less human. Reyne closed her eyes, trying to focus, but the swirling memories were too strong. They were merging into something else, something more terrifying than she could have imagined. She thought of her sister again, the one she had failed to protect, and then she thought of the gun. A horrible thought crept into her mind. What if it wasn't an accident? What if her sister's death had been planned, and someone on the crew had been responsible for it? Someone had manipulated the events, and now, with the rifts pulling at their minds, the truth was starting to surface. Her breath quickened, panic setting in. "No," she whispered, barely able to breathe. "It can't be. It can't be." Captain. Silva's voice cut through her thoughts. She looked up at him, and in that moment, she realized something horrifying. He wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were blank, his expression one of cold indifference. "Who are you?" Reyne whispered, backing away slowly. "What happened to you?" Silva didn't answer. Instead, he raised a hand toward the console, his fingers twitching as if trying to control the rift itself. But it was too late. The rift had already claimed him. The timeline had already claimed him. Reyne's mind raced. Her sister's death, the gun, Silva's change. Everything was starting to make sense, and yet nothing made sense at all. The rifts weren't just distorting space. They were distorting reality, twisting memories, and pulling them into a dark, unimaginable future. Her crew was slipping away from her, their minds unraveling, their reality breaking. And now she was faced with the most terrifying question of all. Was her sister's death truly an accident, or had someone on her crew, someone she trusted, orchestrated it? The truth was slipping through her fingers, just like the timelines themselves, and she had no idea how to stop it. The atmosphere aboard the Starhawk was thick with tension. The ship, once a symbol of human achievement, had now become a cage, a prison of fractured realities. The crew, once unified in purpose, had begun to unravel. Distrust had seeped into every corner of the ship, twisting friendships into something darker. Whispers filled the halls, and every face seemed unfamiliar, like an echo of someone else's memory. Captain Nadia Reyne stood in the command center, staring at the flickering view screen. She had always prided herself on her ability to lead, but now, the weight of the fractured timelines was crushing her. She wasn't even sure if the people she was leading were the same as they had been before the rifts. Everyone had changed, or at least seemed to. Lieutenant Jace Silva was one of the worst cases. He had been her closest friend, her confidant. Together, they had faced countless missions, survived the darkest of moments, and built a bond that seemed unbreakable. But now he was a stranger who had appeared in multiple timelines, each time with a different version of himself. Some versions were more helpful, some more aggressive, some more self-serving. The inconsistency of it all made Reyne question everything. She had confronted him before, demanding answers, but he always evaded her, always danced around the truth. Today, however, something was different. She could feel it in the air, the crackling tension that seemed to surge through the ship like an electric charge. "Lieutenant Silva," Reyne called, her voice steady, though she could feel the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "We need to talk." He appeared from the shadows, stepping into the dim light of the command center. His eyes were cold, too cold. His expression was unreadable, as though he had become a different person entirely. It was as if he had already seen things that she couldn't comprehend. And maybe he had. "You wanted to see me, Captain?" Silva asked, his voice almost too calm, too rehearsed. "Enough of the games," Reyne snapped, her patience worn thin. "I know what you've been doing. You've been jumping between timelines, trying to manipulate the rifts. And I want to know why." Silva didn't respond immediately. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. He was studying her, as though trying to decide what version of her he was dealing with. "You don't understand, Reyne," he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "The rifts, they're not just some accident. They're the key to everything. I've seen it. I can control them, but only if I destabilize the core further." Reyne's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? You want to make things worse. You're telling me you're willing to destroy the ship for some twisted control over time." Silva nodded, but his eyes were distant, as though he wasn't entirely present. "The rifts are the only way we can survive, Reyne. I've seen the future. I've seen Earth, gone, destroyed. But there's still a chance. The rifts, they hold the answer. We can fix it, but only if we collapse everything. Only then can we rewrite history." Reyne recoiled, a sense of dread creeping up her spine. This wasn't the man she had known. Silva had always been pragmatic, cautious even, but now he was talking about destruction. He was talking about unraveling everything for the sake of something that sounded far too dangerous. "What are you asking me to do, Silva?" Reyne's voice was a whisper now, tinged with disbelief. "I'm asking you to let me finish what we started," he said. "To trust me, like you used to. I'm doing this for us. For humanity. For Earth." Reyne felt a chill run through her veins. She had known Silva, but now she didn't recognize him. His eyes were dark, cold, and filled with something she couldn't quite place. There was a hunger there, a need to control something, anything, in the chaos of the rifts. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You're not the man I trusted." Silva's expression flickered, but it was gone before Reyne could react. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out, as if trying to grasp onto something, or someone. "You have to understand, Reyne, the rifts, they're not just breaking us. They're showing us the truth. They're revealing what's hidden, what we've lost, what's been taken from us." Reyne's breath hitched as a vision filled her mind. The rift was showing her something, something terrible. She could see Earth, but it was a twisted, broken version of it. The cities were in ruins, the sky was blackened with smoke, and there were no survivors. No signs of life. Only destruction. It was Earth, but it was gone, lost to time. And standing among the ashes, she saw Silva, but not the man she knew. This version of him was cold, ruthless, a conqueror of time. "This is what will happen if we don't fix this," Silva said softly, his voice carrying the weight of that vision. "We can't let the rifts collapse. We have to push forward, Reyne. This is the only way." Reyne staggered back, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, you're wrong. This isn't the way to save humanity. This is madness." Silva's eyes hardened. "You don't get it, do you? This is the only way. I've seen it. I've lived through it." The air in the room grew heavier, the tension suffocating. Reyne's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. The rifts, Silva's obsession with them, the destruction of Earth, it was all connected. But how? What had happened to the man she had once trusted? She tried to steady herself, but the image of Earth in ruins kept flashing before her. It felt so real, so certain. And then, for a brief moment, she saw another version of herself, standing beside Silva, watching as everything collapsed. She felt a surge of dread. Was this her future? A future where she had joined him in his madness? "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This isn't who we are. This isn't who I am." But Silva didn't hear her. He was already walking away, already lost in the rifts that twisted around them. "You'll understand soon enough, Reyne. You'll see the truth." As he disappeared into the darkness of the ship, Reyne was left alone, torn between the man she had once known and the terrifying possibility of what he had become. The rifts were no longer just a threat to their ship. They were a threat to everything they had ever known. The enemy wasn't just the fractured timelines anymore. The enemy was within. The Starhawk groaned under the pressure of the rifts. Its hull vibrated with an eerie, unnatural hum, like a living thing struggling against the force of 1,000 unseen hands pulling it in every direction. The crew, once united in their mission, was now divided. Every face Reyne saw seemed more alien than the next. Trust had eroded, like sand slipping through fingers, and there was no way to hold it all together. Reyne stood in the command center, staring at the fractured view screen, which displayed the swirling chaos outside. The rifts were growing, expanding, twisting into violent vortexes of light and shadow. No matter what they did, the ship was being torn apart by the very force they had sought to control. "Captain, we need to decide." Lieutenant Silva's voice broke through the tension. His face was haggard, eyes sunken with sleeplessness, but there was still that hint of conviction in his tone. The man Reyne once knew was slipping away, replaced by a stranger. She could hear it in his voice. the desperation in his words. He was no longer speaking for the crew, but for himself. "We can use the rifts," Silva continued, stepping forward. "We can rewrite our pasts, fix everything. I can see it. We just need to stabilize the core long enough to do it. A little more, and I can make it work." Reyne clenched her fists. The urge to scream was overwhelming, but she contained it. "You don't understand, Silva. We've already destabilized too much. The core isn't just a tool, it's a force of its own. We can't keep playing with it." Some of the crew had gathered behind Silva, their eyes wide with hope. Others were not so certain. They had seen the destruction that the rifts had caused, how reality itself had become unstable. But the idea of going back in time, of undoing mistakes, of saving lost loved ones, that temptation was powerful. "We can't fix the past," Reyne said quietly, her voice hoarse. "We can't rewrite history. Every action has consequences, Silva. And right now, the consequence of our choices is destruction. We're in a paradox, a loop we can't escape." "Why not?" Silva demanded. "Why can't we fix it? My sister, your sister, we can save them. We can make it right." The mention of her sister was like a dagger to Reyne's heart. She had lost everything in this mission. Her sister, her father's trust, the crew that once believed in her. But to meddle with time, to risk it all just to correct the wrongs. She knew the risks too well. Her mind flashed back to her father's warnings, his voice echoing in her memories. He had been a scientist, someone who had warned against manipulating time. He had always said that those who tried to control time would inevitably destroy themselves. Time is a force beyond our control, Nadia. Once you disturb it, you can't put it back. Reyne closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words crash over her once more. Her father had been right. They had disturbed the timeline, and now they were paying the price. "What we're doing is breaking the very fabric of reality," Reyne muttered to herself. "We're creating a paradox. Everything we've done, every choice we've made, has led us here. The rifts, the ship, the war, it's all part of a greater paradox, and we can't fix it." But the crew was still divided. Some believed that the rifts could be used for good, that they could return to a time before everything went wrong. Others, however, were starting to agree with Reyne. The ship was falling apart. The more they used the rifts, the more unstable they became. "We can't go back," Reyne said firmly, turning to address the crew. "We can't undo the past, but we can fix the present. We need to destroy the warp core before it's too late, before this entire ship, and everything we've known, disappears into nothing." Silence filled the command center as the crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had known the risks, but the reality of what Reyne was proposing was too much. Destroying the core would mean sacrificing everything they had worked for. The Starhawk, humanity's greatest hope for exploration and survival, would be nothing more than a wreck in space. But what was the alternative? To let the rifts continue to unravel time itself. To give in to the temptation of rewriting their mistakes and creating a future they couldn't possibly predict. "I know what you're asking," Silva said, his voice a low murmur. "But you don't have to do this. Reyne, I can make it work. Just give me a little more time." "No," Reyne said sharply. "I've made my choice. We stop this now. I'm going to destroy the core." As she turned to leave the command center, Reyne heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Silva was following her, still pleading, still trying to convince her that they could control the rifts. But Reyne had made up her mind. There was no turning back now. The crew was already starting to fracture. They were divided, unsure of which path to take, torn between the possibility of saving everything and the certainty of total destruction. Some of them would follow her, others would not. Reyne reached the control room, where the core's system interface blinked ominously. She knew what had to be done. She had to initiate the sequence that would shut the core down for good. It was the only way to stop the rifts from collapsing everything. But as her fingers hovered over the button, the ship shuddered violently. The walls rattled, and the lights flickered. Something was wrong. A massive rift appeared, larger than any they had seen before. It swallowed the view screen, pulling the ship into an infinite black void. Time itself seemed to distort around them, twisting into shapes that defied understanding. Reyne watched in horror as the ship was pulled into the rift, the fabric of space and time unraveling before her eyes. She could hear the screams of the crew, feel the ship's hull crack under the pressure, but it all felt distant, like a dream she couldn't wake up from. The rift grew larger, its edges crackling with energy, pulling everything into it. Reyne gripped the console, trying to hold on, trying to keep control. But there was nothing left to do. The ship was lost, and so were they. In the distance, she could see the stars, but they were fading, shifting in and out of existence. Everything was unraveling. The paradox was complete, and Reyne knew, in that moment, that they had crossed a point of no return. The rift swallowed them whole. Time was no longer a straight line. It was a shattered mirror, and nothing would ever be the same again. The ship trembled, the sound of metal groaning under the weight of collapsing reality. The rifts had torn apart space, bending time in ways that were beyond comprehension. Captain Nadia Reyne stood at the command console, watching the final moments of the Starhawk's existence unfold. Her crew was scattered, lost in the chaos of the fragmented universe. Some had already given in to the madness, their minds shattered by the endless loops and alternate realities. Others had fallen silent, unable to decide which path to take. But the choice now lay with her. The singularity loomed ahead, a vast, swirling mass of nothingness, pulling them all toward it. There was no escape. The core was unstable, its power surging out of control. Time itself was breaking apart, fracturing into pieces that could never be repaired. Reyne knew that the ship, her crew, and everything they had fought for were moments away from being erased from existence. "This is it," she whispered to herself. She had tried everything. She had fought to save them, to preserve the future, but now it was too late. There was no fix, no simple solution. Only one last choice. She turned to her remaining crew, standing in the shadows of the command deck. Lieutenant Silva was still there, though his eyes were distant and unfocused. He had become a shell of the man he once was, lost in the endless loops of fractured time. Reyne could see the regret in his gaze, the recognition that there was no going back, no way to undo the damage they had caused. "Captain," Silva said, his voice trembling, "we have to make a choice. We can either use the warp core to stabilize reality, to fix this, even if it means our deaths, or we can destroy the core, and it will erase everything. The timeline, the Starhawk, all of it, everything will be gone." Reyne felt the weight of his words. The core had caused all of this. It was the heart of the rifts, the thing that had brought them to this point. If they used it to stabilize reality, they would fix the timeline, but at the cost of their lives. There would be no way to survive the explosion of energy that would follow. But if they destroyed it, the timeline they were in would vanish. The universe would reset, and everything they had experienced would be erased. She remembered her father's words, a memory that had haunted her through the endless loops. "The future is a choice, not a trap." Those words echoed in her mind now. She understood them more than ever. They had the power to change their fate, to rewrite history, but they had to embrace the end. It was the only way. The rifts were collapsing faster now, and the very fabric of space seemed to tear apart before her eyes. The stars outside flickered and faded, swallowed by the singularity. Reyne could feel the pull of it, the crushing weight of inevitable destruction. Everything she had fought for, everything they had worked for, was slipping away. And yet, there was still one choice left. "Captain, we need to decide." Silva's voice cracked as he stepped toward her, his hand outstretched toward the control panel. "We don't have much time." Reyne stared at the console, her mind racing. She could feel the pull of the singularity, the desire to fix everything, to save them all. But she also knew that there was no going back. No matter which choice she made, there would be consequences. The rifts had already taken so much. Could she really risk everything to fix it? Her mind flashed back to the many moments she had shared with her crew. The laughter, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose they had all once had. She thought of her sister, of her father, of the people she had lost. She thought of the future they had dreamed of. Was it worth saving? Was it worth sacrificing everything to protect? "I'm sorry," Reyne whispered, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. She knew what she had to do. With a trembling hand, she reached for the control panel, her fingers brushing against the button that would either stabilize the core or destroy it. The crew stood behind her, watching with anxious eyes. The rifts were closing in, and time was running out. There was no room for hesitation. There was no time left for second chances. Reyne closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her. She could hear the voices of her crew, the faint echoes of their past selves, calling out to her, urging her to act. She could hear her father's voice once more. The future is a choice, not a trap. It was a choice. It had always been a choice. She pressed the button. A surge of energy exploded through the ship, the core flaring brightly before collapsing in on itself. The rifts began to close, their violent twisting motions slowly subsiding. The stars outside shifted, their light fading as the very fabric of reality seemed to fold in on itself. The ship groaned, the walls shaking with the force of the collapsing timelines. Reyne could feel the ground beneath her feet trembling, the air thick with the weight of impending collapse. She held on, her eyes fixed on the monitor as the rifts continued to close, one by one. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. Silence. Reyne opened her eyes, blinking against the sudden stillness. The ship was no longer shaking. The rifts had closed. The singularity was gone. But the stars outside had changed. They were different. The galaxy looked different, as though she was seeing it for the first time, from a new perspective. The timeline had reset. She turned to look at her crew, her heart pounding in her chest. They were all there, standing in the same positions they had been in before the rifts had consumed them. But something was different. They were all unchanged, as though nothing had happened. The timeline had reset, but they had no memory of the chaos, the rifts, or the destruction. Reyne stepped away from the console, her mind reeling. It was as if the ship had never traveled through the rifts at all. The timeline had rewritten itself, and they were back to where they had started. Except, she remembered. She remembered everything. And in that moment, she realized that the price of rewriting the future was far higher than she had imagined. The Starhawk was gone. The crew was gone. Her sister was still lost. But she had been given a second chance. But at what cost? The past, the present, and the future were all connected. And now, Reyne was caught in a web of her own making, forced to navigate a world where the future was a choice, but where no one would ever know the truth.